seminars and the following publications. The publications are still it's an absolute must for anyone studying ancient Greek religion, and the seminars are legendary for me. So I am so happy. Professor Marinatos saw that we had a celebration of Martin Nilsson in November, sent me an email, and I mean, that made me very happy, just an email. And when I heard that you were here for the entire year, and then I was able to invite you for a seminar, that's truly a great welcome. Professor Marinatos will not need an introduction here as a scholar. She will be well known for all of us through her work on the ancient Greek religion, especially Minoan, but also, of course, in iconography, the history of scholarship, and also religion and the history writers. If I have interpreted your latest activity, Professor Marinatos is actually going back to her doctoral dissertation, interest-wise, studying Thucydides and religion. Professor Marinatos has her PhD from the University of Colorado Boulder and teaches since 2000 at the University of Illinois, where she is also head of the department of the plastics and Mediterranean studies now. I think I will not go into the vast bibliography, but I will leave the stage to you, and we will listen to a lecture on the new Minoan religion was ever human rights. And I will put on that.
Is technology with us? Yes. Yes. Well, good evening to you, dear colleagues, friends, people that I haven't seen in many years, and some people that I see regularly. I would like to start by having us remember for a very brief moment Robin Hegg, who did so much for formulating ideas around Minoan religion in the 80s, and he initiated me into the study of Nilsson. So I would like us to remember him, a very remarkable man, and Jenny and I often talk about that. So, let's see what I'm going to talk about today. I have called it, in the title of my presentation, as the new Minoan religion. Let me tell you what it is not about. It is not about new methods of studying religion, post-processual methods, new archaeology methods. It's not about that. Rather, it is about new evidence that has emerged and is emerging as we speak with great rapidity. And it's very hard for us, I think, even if we have professionals in the field, to digest all this new information. And I thought it's worth putting it together and reflecting in the context of scholarship, where are we progressing and what are we learning which is new. So as a sample, a representative sample, but not an exhaustive sample, I have put on the board a number of gold rings which have been excavated in Crete. These two have been excavated by George and Living Miyazaki in a tomb near Heraklion, Poros. This ring has been excavated by Kiki the Bessie, whom I was hoping to see here tonight, but she apparently didn't make it. And these two rings have just been published by Jack Davis and Sharon Stalker. They were not found in Crete but in Messenia, but there is no doubt in their minds or in my mind that they are Minoan. And we will be discussing these rings in some detail later. So apart from showing you things that are new, I also thought that it might be very interesting to situate this new evidence within old controversies, and especially the great controversy between Sir Arthur Evans to the left and Martin Persson Nilsson. And I think this is very relevant because the Swedish Institute had very recently, Jenny had organized together with Bruno, a conference on Martin P. Nilsson. I know many of you attended it, and I personally learned a lot. So Nilsson is a very important figure. And I also think that when new evidence comes into mind, it's always very good not to dismiss old theories offhand, because we often have a lot to learn. These people have different approaches, but sometimes very great amount of perspicacity. And so as we move into the future, it's good to look into the past as well. So I'll be saying quite a few things about them. But I do want to start with Sir Arthur Evans, and I will be speaking mostly about Evans and the immense genius that this man had. Not only because he was a methodical scientist, but because he had the ability to read art, an ability that some people do, some people don't, but Evans had it developed to a very great extent, a very acute extent. Now, in 1901, this is just the first year when he was excavating Knossos. So he hadn't unearthed everything in Knossos, but there was enough for him to have a corpus of iconographical as well as archaeological evidence to inspire him to write a synthetic article about Minoan religion. And the title was Tree and Pillar Cult. So this is an abbreviated version, it's a longer title, Tree and Pillar Cult. Published in 1901, now think of that. It's more than 100 years ago, 118 years ago. In this article, he laid out, in my opinion, the basic pillars of Minoan religion. And I have 3 pillars there of Minoan religion, which I will discuss one by one. And then I hope you will agree with me that as we proceed with looking at the iconographical evidence, each of these pillars helps us understand what's going on in Minoan religion. The first one is that gods and goddesses, deities in general, reside inside trees or pillars or stones. In other words, inanimate objects, although a tree is not exactly an inanimate object, it's alive. The second is that trees and pillars are the temporary dwellings. The temporary dwellings of these deities. In other words, the tree or the pillar or the stone is not in itself divine. You don't confuse it with a god. It's not a god. But the god or the goddess takes residence temporarily, just like in a temple. Now, why do they like to do that? They just do. But this is the mentality behind it. And I must say here, and Debbie knows this very well, as well as John in the back, that Evans was very inspired by anthropology of the 19th century, especially a major anthropologist called E.V. Tyler, who had collected a lot of evidence and had tried to lay out this idea that we nowadays call animism. In other words, why do deities take temporary residence in objects? The third, which is a consequence of the other two, is that since these special fancy trees and fancy pillars or stones are temporary residences of gods, of course they make very good shrines. And so worshippers are going to collect, they're going to gather in these shrines, expecting what? Why do they do this? I'm asking a question so I can get the audience involved. Why do worshippers go there? To meet, exactly. It's very simple, but once you think about it, it becomes even more obvious. They go there to meet the deity in the expectation and in the hope that the deity will be there and they will be there. So next, I want to show you this magnificent ring, which was found in Mycenae by Schliemann, but actually it was not Schliemann, it was the Greek representative of the Archaeological Society, Stamatakis, who found this, who was supervising at the time. It was published by Schliemann. Schliemann had his own interpretation. I'm not going to go into it right now. Schliemann saw all the Greek gods there. He saw Hera, he saw Zeus, he saw Demeter. But Evans went in a completely different direction, discussed it at great length. And I want to discuss this ring because it was kind of the base of how he approached the theology of the Minoans, the Minoan belief. So here you have the tree and the goddess seated beneath the tree. And that, of course, is explained by the fact that the tree becomes her temporary dwelling, the temporary residence. The goddess is approached by 3 worshippers, 2 older women, 2 younger women, who give her flowers. So we all know that. We've seen this ring many times. But what was brilliant about Evans is that he looked at the cosmic sphere. And in order to make this clearer, I want to show you the same ring where I have taken the worshippers away. And you have now the abstracted version, and you can see the goddess. You realize that she's meeting and receiving a male god. We can tell he's male because he has a shield, and there is no evidence of a dress. So presumably this is a warrior god with an 8 shield. He's also holding either a spear or a scepter, something like this. We can also tell that he's flying from the air because his tresses, his hair is flying, he's twirling. Evans then said that these snake-like designs indicate the horizon. So basically what you see is the god has descended below the horizon. And above the horizon you have the cosmic sphere, which consists of the sun and the moon. So you have a whole cosmos here. Now, the next thing that Evans said, which is really worth paying attention to, is that underneath is a double axe. And the double axe is an abstract symbol. It's not an implement of cult, as Nilsson was to say later, 25 years later. Nilsson would say, well, the double axe is just a practical object. It's something to kill oxen with. But Evans never believed that. He thought that it's an emblem. And the reason that it is beneath the sun and the moon is because each blade of the double axe represents an aspect of the cosmos. Day and night, darkness and light, underworld, upper world. So he saw this in very symbolic terms. He also proceeded in that same article, I'm still talking about 1901, to explain a little bit more what a tree shrine was. So what is a tree shrine? It's basically an open air, what you might call an open air temple. And we have them even in Greek religion. We have some open air temples or sanctuaries. And what does that mean? It means that they don't have a roof, but inside, when you go inside, you expect to meet the deity. And this is what is happening here. You have a building with regular masonry, ashlar masonry, and behind the walls you see the sacred tree of the deity. This time the deity is not a goddess, but a male god, very vigorous male god. The sun is there. I point out to the sun. And to the left you have a female figure, and it's not clear, Evans couldn't make up his mind, nor can I. It's not clear where this is a goddess, so if it's a divine couple meeting one another, or if it's a worshipper. Either could be the case. But the god is emerging from his shrine because he has just arrived. So next, I want to show you how the idea that the god resides in the tree has been verified by Egyptian frescoes. Here is an Egyptian fresco of the New Kingdom from the tomb of Sennacherib. And it's a little bit later than our seals because it dates from the 19th dynasty. Nevertheless, you can see that the goddess resides in the tree. She's part of the tree. A very good illustration. that has come to light very recently absolutely justifies this original analysis by Evans. So on the right side of the slide, I show you a painting from Xestin 3, Akrotiri. In fact, it's studied by George Alexopoulos, who is here, actually in this room today. And it represents a shrine with a gate, and behind, inside the open-air shrine, you see a tree. This is the sacred tree, in this case, it is an olive tree. Something interesting is happening here. I'm not going to discuss it at length, but I think that maybe it will come up in the discussion after the talk. We don't see the goddess. I believe the goddess is inside the tree. We don't see the goddess, but she's bleeding. And you can see there is blood dripping from these various parts. And this is a kind of epiphany. It's a very unusual thing. It's unique, but I think it can be clearly related to the bleeding goddess who's shown in the next wall. In any case, we have an instance of a tree shrine. And I show the similarity in the structure between Evans's ring and the Thera fresco. And this is just to show that more and more evidence is confirming Evans's ideas. And if you want to see how a contemporary tree shrine looks, here is a shrine from the Tibet, the area of the Tibet, a Buddhist shrine, where there are sacred trees abound for the same reason, because people think that gods reside in them. And you see how well they ornament the facades. So now I come to a very recent find that I'm sure many of you have seen. It has been published recently in Perea, found by Jack Davis and Sharon Stoker. It depicts our usual shrine. So let me go over this ring once again, and then we will see how it fits into Evans's scheme. So remember, this is gold, found in Messenia, but no question about its Minoan origin. We have a coast. This is a coastal area. These are the waves of the sea, the patterns of the sea. In the center, we have the gate of a shrine. We don't see the walls, the ashlar walls, for reasons of economy. We see it frontally, but this is the gate. We have, in addition to the sacred tree, two additional trees, which are palm trees. And then we have two groups of worshippers, one arriving from the right and the other ones arriving from the left. And I do want to focus in this case on the worshippers, what they're doing, what their function is, and what the relationship is to the palace. So this is going to enlarge our understanding of what happened in the tree shrines. So let's start with this group. And I'm going to make a parenthesis and talk about how Evans conceived of Minoan costume, because he was extremely interested in understanding this Minoan culture, not as a kind of primitive culture of the past, but as an extremely sophisticated culture, way more advanced than anybody could have imagined. And one of the things he liked to do is to compare it with Elizabethan dress and Renaissance art. And here, this comparison is revealing. To the left, we have a portrait of Elizabeth the Great, the 16th century Elizabeth. And she's dressed with very heavy fabrics, very heavily embroidered, but Evans claimed that these are heavy fabrics as well, and that many different layers of fabric are employed to make this very full costume of the Minoan queens and goddesses and the priestesses and so on. Very, very tight corset, Evans went into great detail explaining how the corset was going to be set to prepare the décolletage. You may note that Queen Elizabeth has also a very deep décolletage, and sometimes it was covered by a thin material, a thin gauze, and other times the breasts were left practically exposed. This is for young queens, and it emphasizes their femininity. We see this here as well. And almost a coincidence, an uncanny coincidence, is that Queen Elizabeth has embroidered snakes on her sleeve, but this we don't need to make too much of that. So this is leading to my next slide, which is that this group of worshippers found by Stalker and Davis, these are no doubt ladies from the court, ladies from the palace. These are not dressed in flimsy everyday dresses, but the heavy court dress which the etiquette requires. Heavy skirts with various layers. There is a layer here, another layer here, thinner material underneath. Necklaces. Look at how the sleeves are put together and compare it with those sleeves of this Elizabethan costume. So everything has been very, very carefully engraved on the ring to show the status. And finally, we know the very tall hats, which give status to these ladies. So the right side, we have the palace, the presentation of the palace. On the other side of the ring, we have three dancers, an older lady, I believe, and two younger ones. And they're dressed in much lighter dresses, and the whole idea is to have them twirl and swirl. I don't dare do this because this will fall. And they have special necklaces with trimmings so that when they move, when they make the motion, these things are going to float around and give movement and motion and agitation. And as an example, as a comparison, I have adduced these Indian dancers in an Indian festival. They do that a lot. I have found many examples. I thought this is a good one to compare. So the sum of it in the Messenia ring is that you have a tree shrine, you have professional dancers which come there to invoke the goddess in an ecstatic dance. This is a term that both Evans and Nilsson used to please the goddess, to excite the goddess so that she will actually come. And then you have the court ladies who are very sedate and are simply greeting, but are not doing anything special. But the most spectacular of all the conclusions, I think, after the ring of Messenia has been found, is the comparison with the ring of Minos. And here I want to say a few things about the ring of Minos, because this is a case where I was wrong and I want to correct myself in public. The ring of Minos was not found in an excavated context. It was brought to the Heraclean Museum by a dubious priest. By dubious, I mean not a very good character. And it was handed to my father, who was at that time the director of the Heraclean Museum. And my father took a look at it and he said, "This looks too shiny. It's a fake. Give it back to the priest." The priest then took it to Evans. And Evans took a look and he said, "I think this is genuine and I would very much like to buy it." But the priest asked for such an exorbitant price that Evans thought he was quite mad, and he said, "No, I can't find that." But he had made a copy secretly from Plastili, and so he was able to publish it. He was able to incorporate the ring and publish it and interpret it. And I will tell you in a second what his interpretation was. But my father insisted that it was a fake. Nilsson insisted it was a fake, and so it was not included in Nilsson's first or second edition of Minoan Mycenaean religion. My friends in Heraclea George and Minoan absolutely insisted it was genuine. My friend Lena here insisted that it was genuine. So a lot of people were behind the ring. Thank God it was bought. I think that the find from Messenia shows, beyond a shadow of reasonable doubt, that the ring was genuine. So I was wrong, and I admit so in public, but I feel that once again Evans outwitted us. He was right. So what do we have here? We have in both of these rings a shrine at the center of the image. We have a sea here and the sea there. And we have worshippers. The worshippers are different in each case, but the centrality of the shrine next to the sea is an absolute given. So in the next slide, I want to show you now Evans's interpretation, because nobody has interpreted the ring with such precision, and he probably has a definitive explanation. I broke it up, as you can see, in various stages, as Evans did, to show you the stages of the journey. So the first stage is that the goddess, whom you see here, arrives in a peculiar dragon boat. And when I gave a similar talk like the one I'm giving you today in Sweden, I was told by a colleague that this probably indicates that this dragon boat is coming from the beyond, Perea, is coming from the beyond. So she's not just traveling in the Aegean, but she's coming from another world, another realm. And then, stage 2, she arrives at her shrine, sits at the shrine, enthrones herself over there. And once she's there, then her worshippers gather. A male worshipper, in this case, a female worshipper. They touch the tree in expectation, of course, to see the goddess. And this is just about what the ring shows. Not very different from the Messenia ring. So, I'm going to leave the tree shrine aside, but I think I have shown enough to indicate that we have to keep the three shrines in mind all the time if we want to understand Minoan religion, because all new finds are turning up new versions and the picture gets more complete. But now another idea that Evans had, which I believe was even more important, more earth-shaking, more consequent, is that he detected that Minoan religion had one dominant female deity. Not only one deity, he never said that, there were other gods as well, but the female one was dominant and prominent. And he detected her in several rings. I show here two characteristic examples. One is a drawing from a gold ring in the Benaki Museum. It used to be in the Benaki Museum of unknown provenance. And this is from a seal found in the mainland, I believe Mycenae. In both cases, you see that the female goddess is seated. And this is a very important thing to remember, that she's always, almost always, not always, but almost always seated. And that shows she's a queen. Her status is defined by her posture. And in front of her is a young male god, full of vigor, and in himself, very important. In the beginning, Evans played with the idea that maybe he is her younger husband, younger consort. But he rejected this idea, ultimately, for the idea that he is her son. And actually that fits extremely well with other patterns that we have in the Near East. It also explains the fact that she has enormous breasts, and they're quite emphasized. And so Evans said she must be a mother. This is what is being emphasized by the big breasts. So mother and son then are the major divine couple. Now I come to the two rings that have been found in Poros, near Heraklion, by Nota Dimopoulou, Rethymiotakis, and George Rethymiotakis. both of which have been recently published, relatively recently. This one shows Evans' seated goddess. She's seated, we can't see where, but her throne is invisible. It may be up on the top of a mountain or something like this, because here we have some indication of Cropus landscape. So she may be up in the mountain. But important for you to note is that she's flanked by these enormous eagles. Because you will see that the eagles are going to occur and recur again and again in many of the images of the Minoan goddess. And it's a kind of, not only a landmark, but a kind of signal, an emblem of her existence. We even have necklaces of eagles from the Mycenaean graves. And so this refers to her sacred bird. And she's facing the young god, very vigorous, very muscular. He's standing on the podium, and to the right you have a worshipper who doesn't see any of this, Very interestingly, he has turned his back onto the main scene. He doesn't see what's going on, but he's engaged in worshipping the tree. And probably he has this vision in his mind of the seated goddess and her son, the god. Before I leave this, I want to point out one more element. That above him, right here, you see a kind of blurb, which I'm going to be calling a comet from now on. It's not certain that it's a comet, but it's an astral symbol. And it will come again and again, so I notice it. And now to the main ring, which was published literally maybe a week ago in Attention Italian by George Living Miyazaki, and I think that it brings so much together of what we have been discussing. So what do we have here? We have a rocky landscape, probably as in the previous ring. We have the goddess seated, again, flanked by these enormous birds. The sun, very much in the center of the axis. And then the moon and the comet, but the comet is above the young god, the sun, who is greeting the mother goddess. I'm going to show this ring once again and explain George Miyazaki's interpretation, which is even a little bit more complicated, a little bit more detailed. But you have seen enough now to see that the pattern is emerging very clearly. What else do we have which is new? A fresco from Thera. Well, that's not new, but it has been relatively recently restored. It's not, in my opinion, as well known as it should be. But let me tell you what the significance of this fresco is. In Santorini or Thera, we have no evidence of any deity except that seated female deity. And I'm going to use this as kind of argument to support the intuition and the vision of Evans' interpretation of Minoan religion. And she's flanked by this huge bird, which is a griffin in this case, not an eagle, and a monkey, and so on and so forth. Many of you will have seen that fresco before. Now, look at these two rings, which have been published recently by Davis and Stalker. And familiar patterns. Here the goddess is flying, not together with an eagle, but together with this huge griffin, the same pattern. Here, the goddess is descending, flying around descending, and flanked by these enormous birds, the eagles, that we have seen again and again. So there are repetitive patterns. A vocabulary is beginning to emerge very clearly. But what about the male god? As you remember, already on the golden ring from Iceni, found by Stamatakis, the male god was present, and Evans was very quick to identify him as the sun and as a warrior god. The warrior god appears in Crete and sometimes in very violent I have written about this. So this is not peaceful Minoans gathering flowers. No, the male god is an embodiment of male warrior strength. And there is clearly a warrior ideal in Minoan Crete. And here you have him, and he's striking with his sword an enemy whom he has caught by the hair, and he's ready to kill, and he's accompanied by a huge dog. And here you have fallen corpses. Now, why is that important? Because it makes so much sense out of what Jack Davis found. I will show this picture a little bit later. Jack Davis found recently a very similar seal stone, not a sealing impression, but the actual seal stone, which depicts something very similar with that. And I think it is a god rather than a man. So, a summary now of some of the main points made by Evans before we move to Nilsson. Gods reside in trees. The major deity is female, something that he called monotheism. She has a warrior son. And, not to forget, she's a sky goddess. And she's also a sea goddess, if necessary, and a goddess of the underworld. In other words, this goddess is cosmic. She encompasses all aspects of the cosmos. And this is why she's dominant and major. She's not particular. She encompasses everything. She's also a mother because she has a son. Let's come to Nilsson now. First, let me tell you what Nilsson did. Not what he didn't do, but what he did. Nilsson wrote his book, Minoan and Messenian Religion, 25 years after Evans had written his Tree and Pylos, 24 years. And he had much more evidence to collect. And he was an excellent and extremely systematic collector. So he categorized the evidence. Here are the 3 shrines. Here are the increments of cult. Here are gods. Here are goddesses. To me, his classification did not throw much light on, it didn't help me understand my own religion, but at least he brought all this evidence together. And so until today, we can take Nilsson's book, both the first edition and the second, and find valuable pictures and valuable descriptions. But when you start reading the book carefully, you realize that he has an agenda. His agenda is survival in Greek religion. This is really what interested him. He wasn't really so interested in Minoan Crete. He was a historian of Greek religion. And so Minoan religion was just a foil for him to dig deeper and find the origins. And in case you don't believe me, look at his other books. The Mycenaean origin of Greek mythology, origins again. Or here, Homer and Mycenae. This is a constant theme of his later years. And here you see him, a nice portrait of his later years. The most interesting controversy between the two of them, I must say, they were very polite to each other and they liked each other. They were two civil, extremely civil gentlemen. But the one thing that they disagreed with was Evans's idea of monotheism. So let me just say a few things about why Evans insisted on the word monotheism. He knew perfectly well that there were other gods. But as I said, he wanted to show the all-encompassing and broad nature of the Minoan goddess. And the reason he insisted on monotheism is because he wanted to show the quality of Minoan religion. It wasn't something primitive, an early stage of this religion or the other religion. It was in itself a major force. And Nilsson fought this very much. He said, no, there is no monotheism. There is no monotheism in Greek religion. Why should there be in Minoan religion? And the controversy went back and forth between 1925 and 1932 with the publication of the second volume and third volume of Palatial of Minos. to conclude now, I'm going to bring myself into this debate as a kind of third person, taking the side of Evans, but also having the mild satisfaction that my hypothesis that one of the features of the Minoan goddess is her solar connection, and she's a sun goddess, has been more than justified by recent evidence. So this is just an image of my book, published in 2010. Let's look now with renewed interest at the Miyazaki ring published in Athens in Italian. Of course, Miyazaki recognizes immediately the great significance of the astral world on this particular image. As you remember, these are the lines on the horizon, and Miyazaki sees the sun, the cycles of the moon, not just the moon, but the cycles of the moon, full moon, half moon, quarter moon, etc. And this object he sees either as a comet or maybe a galaxy, that is the end of the cluster of stars at the edge of the galaxy. He tends to call it a galaxy, but he's also positive to the idea that it's a comet. So what he thinks is going on is that you have a kind of lunar calendar. I better not move away. So he sees a kind of lunar calendar then, and at a very specific point, when there is a certain alignment of stars in the sky, he thinks this is when the meeting takes place between the goddess and the god. And this is the gist of his interpretation. He also thinks that this ring, which was found in Katosini in Crete, and published by Pauline Muley and Kiki the Bessie, this guy here is not just an athlete. He's a runner, of course, we can all see that. But he's not just a mere athlete, he is a god. And look at the comment about his head, which we have seen in another 2 slides. So again, there is a kind of consistent depiction of the god with his comet. And he thinks that this is a kind of running in time. It's not just a runner, but it's a journey in time with the astral world participating in the motion of the deities. So we're moving a long way from chthonic deities and so on. And for the last slides, to summarize my thoughts, I have done the following. I have presented you here with a cocktail of what I consider some of the most interesting images. And you will see that in all of them, the sun appears. And I don't see how one can doubt the hypothesis of the solar cult of the Minoans. Let's start with this one. Double ox, the sun. Goddess, the sun. Goddess, sun, and the moon. The Nike ring, goddess, the sun. 2 lions, the sun. Theris ring, the goddess, the sun, the comet, and the moon over there. And this is just a small cocktail. There is more. And to give you a bit of an Egyptian flavor as well, this is the Minoan seal, and it shows 2 demons worshipping a pole, and at the top of the pole you see the sun disk. It's very similar to this one, and the Egyptian, very nice Egyptian pyramid with 2 apes who are worshipping the sun in the center. So there is an Egyptianizing, for sure, flavor into all this. We won't have time to go much into it, but Egypt has to be taken into account when we enlarge our horizons. Conclusion then, was Nilsson or Evans right? And what I would say for this is that Minoans hit maybe 90% of his scheme. There isn't very much that he said that has been proven wrong. We have improved, but by emphasizing that Minoan religion had a uniqueness to it, that it had to be divorced from Greek religion, and it had to be seen in its own right, I think he was entirely justified. As far as Nilsson goes, I think his mistake was to conflate Minoan and Mycenaean and to subordinate it to Greek religion. And I leave you with that. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. I know this was absolutely fantastic. It also fitted extremely well with the Nilsson lectures of November. I'm sure there will be many questions and comments, and so I open up the floor for the first ones. I see no hand. Yes, I do. Kiki?
Yes. Because I do not know the chronology of the objects that you have shown us, the golden rings, I'd like to ask you, when does the solar cult begins in Crete, in Minoan Crete?
Okay. Let me disengage. I think I've used this microphone, yes? So, all the material I have shown you dates from the New Palace period. And the New Palace period is from, very roughly speaking, 1650 to 1400, if you want to be specific. So when does the solar cult begin? Much earlier, at least by 2000, at least, but probably before. Possibly, it begins already in the Cyclades. I have discussed it with Marisa Marthari very often. Possibly we have evidence of this in the Cyclades, so much earlier. But the Minoans give it this very specific shape, which connects it with kingship. You know, because the palace it's a palatial culture, so she has to become queen. But there is solar cult much before. Also, let me tell you that when I went to Sweden, I was told by some of my colleagues that were doing Nordic religions that the solar cult is everywhere. There is no place where there is no solar cult. Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, the Vikings, everywhere. So in fact, it's an amazing prejudice that we have. Because it's not in Greek religion, we have sort of ignored it. But it's the dominant scheme, actually.
Yes, anyone else? Yes.
Sorry.
Do you think I
can hear you.
Yeah.
I was very curious, and as we look at the identity of the goddess and the nature of the offerings made, the Thera fresco of the goddess with the red patches that are blood, and it sounds as if you believe this is her blood. Why would one expect to have her blood when it looks like it's horns of consecration? But could that not be an altar in which, for example, if this were from Central America, it would be the bleeding hearts of the victims or the like? I mean, why do we know it has to be hers? And is there not an implied slant toward a kinder, gentler view of religion than is perhaps warranted by the evidence?
So the question was, in case you didn't hear, on the fresco I showed from Thera, which is bleeding, the shrine is bleeding. How do we know that this is not an offering, but it's the blood of the goddess? I have several reasons. The first reason is that the fresco next to it, I mean literally next to it, shows the goddess bleeding. Her foot is bleeding. So you have the narrative there. The second reason is that this is definitely not an altar, this is a gate. And you don't go up on a gate to make an offering. I mean, I don't see how this would be physically, that you go up on the gate to make an offering. An altar has to be relatively low. Yeah. And Brady, another thing. And the tree is bleeding as well. Maria.
Thank you, Nanno, for what we heard to this evening. I would like to ask you, what is your opinion about the master impression, Kenya?
Great question about the master impression of Hanya. Yeah, I do believe he's a god, but he could be the king as well, or the king and the god and the king. Who can tell the difference? But certainly he fits that he's the master of the town, and that's extremely important. So I'm very glad you bring it up, because yes, the goddess with the cosmic aspect, but the god is very important as well, extremely important. Thank you.
On the Poros ring, the last one, we see 7 stars surrounding the sun. I have seen you have mentioned the Nordic impression, and there is this with the sun, the moon, and the 7 stars, the Pleiades. That's how they say. Maybe it's not a coincidence, it's just for embellishment that they have 7 stars. Yeah, there is certainly a disc in Germany with the 7 stars, the sun and the moon. Yeah. And it's bronze, and they are cutouts of gold that make the stars. It's a kind of a synthesis. Yeah. Yeah.
Any more questions, comments? Otherwise, thank you once again for this fantastic lecture. I don't dare to applaud with this microphone, so you will have to stop doing applauding. And now I hope you will bear with us while we very quickly rearrange the chairs. Stay on, have a glass of wine, continue discussing all aspects of Greek religion, and come back on the 29th already of January, when Tyler Joe Smith will give a seminar on religious drama, so that will be very exciting. Thank you all for coming, and welcome back.